The elders say the groom paid too much for her dowry.
And that dress is far too revealing for a chief's wife. She looks so beautiful in that dress.
Yes. A fine match for the chief's son.
May her heart be strong.
She thinks she is royalty now. Look at her standing there.
Yes, the water tastes better when served with respect.
He studies the old ways, but his heart is weak.
The ancestors see his folly. He brings shame.
The night before her wedding, the house did not sleep. Lamps burned late, shadows moving across the walls as women came and went, carrying trays, folding clothes, whispering prayers. Outside, the air was warm and heavy, filled with the sound of distant drums and laughter from neighbors who were already celebrating. Tomorrow was meant to be her day. She sat alone on the edge of a small bed, her hands resting on her lap, fingers trembling just slightly. Her wedding dress hung nearby, simple but clean, carefully pressed. Every few moments she looked at it again as if it might disappear if she didn't. Her heart was full of mixed feelings, hope, fear, and a quiet excitement she did not dare show too openly. She had learned long ago that showing too much happiness invited questions. Questions often led to judgment. Judgment always found her. She was the youngest sister. The quiet one. The one people forgot to praise. In her family, her sisters were bright flames. Loud. Confident. Always noticed. She was the shadow beside them, useful, obedient, easy to ignore. From childhood, she had learned to lower her eyes, to speak softly, to accept her place without complaint. Still, tonight she allowed herself a small smile. Marriage meant more than love in her world. It meant respect. It meant becoming a woman whose name carried weight. A married woman was listened to, protected. See. For her, this marriage felt like a doorway opening after years of standing outside. Yet even in this moment of joy, something uneasy pressed against her chest. Her sisters moved through the house like queens preparing for a feast. They laughed too loudly. They looked at her with smiles that did not reach their eyes. Their words were sweet, but their glances were sharp. She felt it, the old tension, the silent measuring, the unspoken question that had followed her all her life. Why her? As she sat there, memories rose like dust from the floor. Times when her sisters stood together and she stood alone. Times when her mistakes were remembered and her efforts ignored. Times when she swallowed tears and told herself it was normal, that this was how families were. She tried to push those thoughts away. Tomorrow was about love. About a future she had built quietly, without noise or pride. A future she had protected from their opinions for as long as she could. Still, fear lingered. Marriage did not erase the past. It only brought it closer to the surface. Outside, her sister's laughter grew louder. Someone called her name, sharp and careless, as if pulling her back into place. She rose slowly, smoothing her dress, steadying her breath. She reminded herself to stay calm, to stay grateful. She did not see the looks her sisters shared behind her back. She did not hear the whispers that followed when she walked away. The night stretched on, heavy with meaning. Elders spoke blessings. Women sang songs about loyalty and honor. Hands touched her shoulders, offering advice, warnings, expectations. No one asked how she felt. As the moon climbed higher, she stood by the doorway and watched her sisters talk among themselves. Their faces were bright, their smiles sharp with something she could not name. Not happiness. Not pride. Something colder. Her chest tightened. She told herself she was imagining things. That old wounds made her suspicious. That blood could not truly wish harm. But deep inside, a quiet voice stirred, a warning she had learned to ignore. Tomorrow everyone would be watching. Tomorrow words would carry weight. Tomorrow what had lived in silence for years would step into the open. She closed her eyes and held her breath, unaware that the greatest wound of her life was not waiting outside the family, but standing right beside her, smiling. Her place in the family had been decided long before she understood what it meant. As a child, she learned early that silence kept the peace. While her sisters filled rooms with laughter and strong voices, she stayed close to the walls, watching, listening. When guests visited, her sisters were pushed forward, praised for their beauty, their sharp minds, their confidence. She was asked to bring water, to clean up, to sit quietly. No one said she was less. They didn't need to. Their actions spoke for them. Her sisters were older, taller, bolder. They wore pride like a crown. If they failed, excuses were made for them. If they succeeded, the whole family celebrated. When she tried and stumbled, her mistakes followed her for years, brought up like jokes at family gatherings. She remembered how her sisters laughed when she struggled with schoolwork, how they shook their heads and called her slow, even when she tried harder than anyone. She remembered how one sister would correct her in front of others, enjoying the small power it gave her. The other would smile sweetly while adding small comments that cut deep. It was never loud cruelty. That would have been easier to fight. It was the quiet kind. The kind that made you doubt yourself. At family meals, her sisters spoke freely, interrupting elders, sharing opinions. When she spoke, voices talked over her. If she insisted, someone would say she was rude. She learned to stop trying. Her sisters believed they deserved more. Better husbands. Better lives. Better futures. They said it openly without shame. And over time, she began to believe the opposite about herself. She watched them grow into strong young women admired by many. Suitors came. Promises were made and broken. Each disappointment hardened them. Each success fed their pride. They compared themselves not only to others, but always to her. And in those comparisons they always won. When she helped at home, it was expected. When they helped, it was praised. When she dressed simply, it was called dull. When they dressed boldly, it was called confidence. Even her kindness was turned against her, called weakness. Yet she endured. She learned patience from long days of waiting to be noticed. She learned strength from carrying burdens without complaint. She learned humility because pride had never been safe for her. There were moments, small, painful moments, when she wondered if she truly belonged in that house. When she lay awake at night, listening to her sisters talk and laugh together, she felt like a guest in her own family. Still, she loved them. That love was quiet too. It did not demand anything. It only hoped. She hoped they would see her one day. That they would understand her worth without her having to prove it. That sisterhood would mean protection, not competition. But resentment grows where kindness is ignored. Her sisters grew used to being admired. Used to leading. Used to control. And every time someone praised her for anything, even something small, their smiles tightened. Their eyes narrowed. Something dark flickered beneath their confidence. They told themselves she was lucky. Lucky to live in their shadow. Lucky to learn from them. Lucky to know her place. They never noticed how strong she was becoming. Years passed and the pattern stayed the same. The family trusted her with responsibilities but not with respect. They leaned on her kindness but never asked how heavy the weight felt. And beneath all of it, old wounds stayed open. Unspoken words. Swallowed tears. Smiles forced into place. By the time she grew into a woman, the damage was already done. She carried doubt like a second skin. She lowered her head even when she deserved to stand tall. She apologized even when she was not wrong. Her sisters mistook her silence for weakness. They did not realize that silence can also be patience. That patience can become power. The resentment they planted in childhood did not disappear. It only waited. It settled deep, growing quietly, feeding on pride and envy. And when the moment came, when she stepped into something they believed belonged to them, that buried bitterness would rise. Not as anger, but as humiliation. The kind that waits for the perfect time. She did not meet him in a grand moment. There was no crowd, no celebration, no dramatic beginning. Their first meeting was simple, almost forgettable to anyone watching. That was why it mattered. It happened during an ordinary day, when she was running an errand for the family, moving through life the way she always did, quietly without expecting anything for herself. He noticed her when others did not. At first it was small things. The way he listened when she spoke. The way he waited instead of rushing her words. With him she did not feel invisible. She did not feel rushed or corrected. She felt calm. Their bond grew slowly, like something planted in secret soil. No loud promises. No pressure. Just shared moments, short walks, simple conversations, steady understanding. He admired her patience. He respected her silence. Where others saw weakness, he saw strength. For the first time in her life, she felt safe being herself. She did not rush to tell her family. She had learned what happened when she shared joy too early. So she kept this happiness close to her heart, protecting it the way she had protected herself for years. But secrets never stay hidden forever. When her sisters found out, their reactions were sharp and quick. They smiled, but their eyes scanned him, searching for flaws. They asked questions that sounded polite but carried judgment. They laughed softly when they thought she wasn't listening. They did not believe in the relationship. To them, love was loud and impressive. Came with status, gifts, attention. What she had looked too simple, too quiet, too undeserved. They planted doubt like seeds. They questioned his intentions, his future, his ability to provide. They reminded her, often, of what she lacked. They spoke as if they were protecting her, but their words always left her feeling smaller. At night, their voices echoed in her mind. She wondered if she was asking for too much, if she was being foolish, if happiness was something meant for people like her. Still she stayed. She stayed because with him she could breathe. Because he never made her feel like she had to compete or explain her worth. Because love, she learned, did not have to shout to be real. Her sisters watched closely. They noticed how she smiled more, how she stood a little straighter, how her eyes no longer dropped as quickly. That change unsettled them. It was as if something they believed they controlled was slipping away. They tried harder. Small comments became frequent reminders. Comparisons grew sharper. Old failures were brought up again, dressed as concern. Each time she chose silence. She had been trained for it. But silence does not erase pain. It only hides it. When he spoke of marriage, fear gripped her before joy could settle. Marriage was sacred, powerful, permanent, and once again she was afraid to want it too much. Yet when he asked her to build a life with him, something inside her shifted. Years of doubt trembled. Years of being less than weakened. For once, she allowed herself to believe she deserved something good. The engagement was simple. No grand announcement. Just a quiet promise made with steady hands and honest intention. Telling her family felt like stepping into a storm. Her sisters congratulated her with smiles that felt forced. Their words were careful. Their tone polite. But beneath it all, something changed. The air grew tense. Conversations stopped when she entered the room. Glances were exchanged behind her back. They could not understand how she, the quiet one, the overlooked one, had reached this moment before them. Their pride took a wound. That night, as she lay awake, joy and fear tangled in her chest. She was happy, yes, but she also felt exposed. As if standing in the light had made her visible in a way that invited danger. In another room, her sisters sat together, speaking in low voices. Their faces were tight, their thoughts restless. Something had been taken from them, not by force but by fate. And they were not ready to accept it. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, she did not know that the love she had found so quietly had awakened something dark. Something patient. Something waiting for the right moment to strike. The celebration had been announced. But the war had begun. After the engagement, nothing in the house felt the same. On the surface, everything looked normal. Smiles were shared. Blessings were spoken. Plans for the wedding began. But beneath the polite words and forced laughter, something bitter had taken root. Her sisters changed in ways that were easy to miss but hard to ignore. They became overly helpful, offering advice she did not ask for. They corrected her choices with soft voices and sharp eyes. They reminded her, again and again, of traditions, expectations, and what a bride should be. Each reminder felt less like guidance and more like control. Their smiles hid resentment. Whenever relatives visited, her sisters took the lead in conversations. They spoke about the wedding as if it belonged to them. They made jokes about her simplicity, her quiet nature, her luck. The words were wrapped in laughter, but the meaning was clear. She felt it, the pressure, the comparisons, the way eyes measured her. In their world, marriage was not just love. It was status. It was proof of worth. And now that proof rested with her. Whispers traveled fast. Extended family members asked careful questions. Some were curious. Others were doubtful. Her sisters never defended her. Instead, they let the doubts grow, adding just enough uncertainty to keep the fire alive. They spoke of past relationships, of mistakes, of whether she was ready. They never spoke of her strength. Inside, she battled fear and hope every day. She tried to focus on the life she was building, not the noise around her. But years of being underestimated had taught her to listen closely, even when no one spoke directly. Her sisters watched her closely too. They saw how attention shifted toward her. How elders began to mention her name with respect. How neighbors praised her patience and calm. Each compliment was a wound to their pride. They had believed they were ahead. Now they felt left behind. One sister carried bitterness from a broken promise. The other hid disappointment behind confidence. Both feared the same thing, that she would succeed where they had stumbled. And envy is dangerous when it feels justified. They spoke in private, away from listening ears. Their faces were serious. Their words careful. Plans formed slowly, wrapped in concern and tradition. Nothing that could be traced back to cruelty. Nothing that would make them look guilty. They told themselves they were restoring balance, that they were protecting family honor, that she needed to be humbled. She sensed the shift but could not name it. She felt watched, judged, tested. Every decision seemed wrong in someone's eyes. The closer the wedding came, the heavier the air grew. Her sisters took control of preparations, insisting on handling important details. They corrected her in front of others, smiling while doing it. They reminded her of her past, subtly, as if warning her not to forget where she came from. She swallowed her pride. She told herself peace mattered more than pride, that endurance had always been her strength, that if she stayed calm things would settle. But envy does not settle. It sharpens. As wedding day approached, her sister's energy shifted again, quieter now, focused. They moved with purpose. They shared looks that stopped when she entered the room. They laughed at moments that made no sense. Something was coming. The night before the ceremony, as elders finalized plans and women prepared songs, her sisters stood together, watching her from across the room. Their eyes held something unreadable. Not love, not joy. Calculation. She felt a chill run through her body. Marriage, she had believed, would bring respect. But she was beginning to understand that stepping into the light had made her a target. The very thing that was meant to lift her had awakened the darkest parts of those closest to her. The wedding would be beautiful, they said. But beauty can hide sharp edges. As she closed her eyes that night, heart full of hope and fear, Fate stood quietly beside her sisters, listening, waiting. The celebration was ready. So was the battlefield. The wedding day arrived wrapped in color and sound. The courtyard was filled with people, family, neighbors, elders, distant relatives who had traveled far to witness the union. Bright fabrics moved like waves in the sunlight. Drums beat steadily and songs rose into the air, carrying wishes of joy and long life. Everything looked perfect. She stood at the center of it all, dressed as a bride, her hands decorated, her heart pounding. This was the day she had imagined through years of silence and endurance. The day she believed would mark a new beginning. As she walked forward, eyes lowered in respect, she felt both pride and fear. Pride for surviving long enough to reach this moment. Fear because so many eyes were watching. Her sisters stood close by, dressed beautifully, their faces calm, their smiles practiced. To anyone else they looked like loving family. To her they felt distant, unreadable. The ceremony began. Blessings were spoken. Elders nodded with approval. Her husband-to-be stood nearby, steady and calm, a quiet strength beside her. For a brief moment her heart settled. She allowed herself to breathe. Then the air shifted. It happened slowly, almost gently. One sister stepped forward under the excuse of tradition. Another followed, holding something in her hands. The music softened. Conversations quieted. Attention turned toward them. She did not understand at first. Her sisters spoke with confident voices, addressing the crowd with smiles that seemed warm. They said they wished to honor truth before the union was sealed. They spoke of family pride, of honesty, of responsibility. Her chest tightened. Before she could react, they began to reveal pieces of her past, moments taken out of context, struggles she had survived, private details she had trusted family to keep. They framed her endurance as weakness, her silence as guilt, her humility as proof of unworthiness. Gasps moved through the crowd. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Each word struck her like a slap. She stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. Her ears rang. Her hands trembled beneath the weight of eyes judging her. She searched for familiar faces. Some looked away. Some whispered. Some stared with open curiosity, as if her pain were a story meant for their entertainment. Her sisters continued, calm and controlled. They laughed softly at moments, turning cruelty into performance. They spoke as if they were protecting the family, saving the marriage from shame. But shame was exactly what they were delivering. Her heart broke in pieces. Inside her mind, memories clashed, childhood insults, swallowed tears, nights of doubt. All of it rushed back at once, louder than the drums, heavier than the crowd. She felt small, exposed, stripped of dignity. She wanted to disappear. Her husband-to-be turned toward her, confusion crossing his face. He had not known this side of her family. He had not prepared for this attack. She could not bring herself to look at him. The silence that followed was heavy. No one stepped in. Elders hesitated. Family members shifted uncomfortably. Some believed the sisters. Others did not know what to believe. But doubt had already done its damage. She felt tears burn her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Years of endurance rose within her. Years of learning how to survive humiliation quietly. She straightened her back. She lifted her chin. Even as her heart collapsed, she held her body still. Her sisters watched closely, waiting for her to break. She did not give them that satisfaction. The ceremony paused. Whispers spread like fire. The joy of the day cracked, splintering under the weight of cruelty disguised as truth. Finally, the elders spoke again, urging calm, urging peace. The ceremony moved forward, but something sacred had already been lost. What was meant to be a celebration now carried a shadow that could not be ignored. She felt numb. When the vows were completed, when the final blessings were spoken, she stood as a married woman, but not as she had imagined. The applause felt distant. The smiles forced. The happiness fragile. Her sisters stepped back into the crowd, their job done. Their faces showed no regret, only quiet satisfaction. As guests slowly dispersed, conversations buzzed with speculation. Her name passed from mouth to mouth, reshaped by rumor and judgment. Her pain became public property. She walked away with steady steps, though every part of her felt broken. That night, when the music faded and the guests left, she sat alone in a quiet room. The weight of the day pressed down on her chest. The joy she had carried for so long lay crushed beneath humiliation. But even in that darkness, something remained. She had survived. Her sisters had tried to destroy her in front of the world, and failed to erase her completely. As she stared into the silence, unaware eyes watched from the shadows of fate. What had been done in pride had been seen. What was planted in cruelty had taken root. And the harvest would come. The days after the wedding passed in a blur. The house that once buzzed with celebration fell into an uneasy quiet. The laughter was gone. The songs had faded. In their place was silence, thick, heavy, and full of things no one wanted to say. She moved through each day like a shadow. As a new wife, she was expected to smile, to adjust, to be grateful. But inside, something had cracked so deeply that even breathing felt like effort. The humiliation from her wedding day replayed in her mind without warning. A look from a neighbor. A pause in conversation. A sudden whisper behind her back. Each moment reopened the wound. She began to question everything. Her worth. Her past. Her future. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how joy could turn into shame so quickly. She wondered if she had been foolish to believe she could step out of her sister's shadow. If silence had been a mistake instead of protection. Her marriage began under that weight. Her husband was kind, but confusion lingered between them. He did not blame her, yet the words spoken at the wedding had planted doubt that neither of them knew how to pull out. They spoke carefully. They avoided certain topics. Love was still there, but it now carried pain. She tried to be strong. She had always been strong. But strength has limits. She stopped visiting neighbors. She avoided gatherings. She lowered her eyes again, returning to the posture she knew best. The respect she had hoped marriage would bring felt distant, uncertain. Meanwhile, her sisters moved freely. They showed no regret. They spoke of the wedding as if it had gone exactly as it should. In quiet moments, their smiles carried pride. They told themselves they had done what was necessary. That truth had been spoken. That they had protected family honor. They did not ask how she was. They did not apologize. Their satisfaction was silent but clear. Yet fate had begun to stir. Small cracks appeared in their lives, almost invisible at first. A broken promise here. A missed opportunity there. People who once admired them started to look away. Whispers changed direction. Confidence thinned. They laughed it off. They believed themselves untouchable. She noticed the changes but said nothing. Pain had taught her patience. She focused on rebuilding herself piece by piece. On learning how to live with the weight of what had happened. On choosing dignity when anger would have been easier. Slowly she began to heal, not loudly, not publicly, but deeply. She learned that survival did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying pain without letting it shape her soul. She poured her strength into her marriage, into quiet acts of kindness, into small moments of peace. And somewhere beyond what anyone could see, fate watched closely. The balance had shifted. What was taken from her in public would not be forgotten. What was done without mercy would not go unanswered. Time, patient and exact, had begun its work. She did not know it yet, but the silence that surrounded her was not emptiness. It was waiting. Time has a way of revealing what pride tries to hide. For a while, her sisters continued as they always had, walking with confidence, speaking with authority, certain they were still admired. They told themselves the wedding incident had settled things. That the family had moved on. That their place remained secure. But slowly, quietly, life began to change. It started with small disappointments, invitations that never came, promises that were delayed, then forgotten. People who once sought their opinions now listened politely and walked away. The respect they had worn so easily began to slip. At first they blamed others. They blamed jealousy, bad luck, even her. They never blamed themselves. Meanwhile she was changing too, but in a different way. Pain had stripped her down, leaving only what was real. She no longer tried to impress anyone. She no longer explained herself. She focused on her home, her marriage, and the quiet dignity she had always carried. Her husband saw her strength more clearly now. He watched how she endured without bitterness, how she chose patience over anger. Trust grew between them, not because the past was erased, but because truth slowly replaced rumor. People noticed. Neighbors began to greet her again. Elders spoke to her with kindness. Some even apologized without words, offering small gestures of respect. They saw a woman who had been humiliated yet remained whole. That quiet strength became her shield. Her sisters, on the other hand, felt the ground shift beneath them. One faced disappointment after disappointment in her personal life. Plans failed. Relationships fell apart. The admiration she once depended on turned into silence. The other struggled with loss, of influence, of control, of the attention she believed she deserved. Their pride made it harder. They grew restless, defensive, angry. They noticed how people now spoke of her with respect. How her name was no longer followed by whispers but by understanding. How her calm presence carried weight. It unsettled them. They had tried to break her. Instead they had revealed her strength. Fate worked without noise. The same traits they once mocked, patience, humility, endurance, now lifted her. The same pride they carried became a burden. Their words, once sharp, now sounded empty. Still they refused to look inward. They clung to old beliefs, old stories, old excuses. But the world was no longer listening. And slowly the consequences of their actions gathered around them. She watched from a distance. Not with joy. Not with revenge. With understanding. She knew pain too well to celebrate someone else's fall. But she also knew this. What they were facing was not cruelty. It was balance. It was truth returning to its source. One evening, as she stood in her doorway watching the sun set, she felt something unfamiliar. For the first time, her life was not shaped by their opinions. Their voices had lost their power. She had survived their worst, and become stronger. Behind her, her sisters struggled to hold on to a world that no longer bowed to them. Ahead of her, a future waited, quiet, steady, and free. But fate was not finished yet. The final lesson would come not through loss alone, but through realization. And when it arrived, it would be impossible to ignore. The sisters never expected it to come so quietly. At first, the cracks in their lives seemed small. A failed business deal, a lost opportunity, a friend turning away. They shrugged it off, blaming luck or circumstance. But the setbacks grew sharper, more undeniable. Each loss felt like a shadow stretching wider, closing in around them. The sister who had once prided herself on charm found doors closing where they had once been open. Invitations disappeared. Praise became silence. She looked around, searching for explanations, but none came. Her confidence began to crumble, not overnight but piece by piece. The other, whose arrogance had always set her apart, faced failures of a different kind. Decisions she had made impulsively now came back to haunt her. People she had belittled or dismissed turned away, refusing to support her when she needed it most. The social influence she had relied on faded like mist under the sun. They began to notice her. The quiet sister, the one they had humiliated, overlooked, and mocked, was thriving despite everything. She moved through life with calm, deliberate steps. Her marriage flourished under love and respect. Her voice carried weight without forcing itself. People listened to her not because of her family name or the loudness of her presence, but because she embodied dignity and strength. And with each glance they stole at her, their own pride cracked further. They realized, too late, that they had spent their lives building walls of superiority over someone who had never needed them. Every insult, every slight, every moment they thought they were clever had only polished her resilience. And now it shone brightly for everyone to see. Regret began to creep in, not the fleeting kind but deep, gnawing regret. They understood what they had destroyed, not just her peace but the illusion of their own untouchable power. Yet, as recognition dawned, it brought no redemption. No one to apologize to could erase the years of calculated humiliation. No smile could undo the public shame they had inflicted. The world and even their family no longer shielded them. Fate had mirrored their cruelty back. Their own moments of insecurity, small failures, and social missteps were now public, scrutinized, and judged. They stood isolated in ways they had never anticipated. Where they had once commanded attention effortlessly, now they were ignored, questioned, and pitted. And she, the sister they had tried to break, stood firm, whole, and respected. Yet she did not gloat. She did not mock their downfall. She had learned too well that the cycle of pain was destructive. Instead, she observed quietly, letting the natural order of justice speak louder than any word she could say. In the stillness, the full weight of their actions landed on them. The humiliation they had once administered like a weapon now defined their existence. Their faces, once proud and unshakable, now revealed the truth they had refused to see. The strength they had dismissed had always been greater than their own pride. For the first time, they understood the cost of envy and arrogance. They saw the sister they had tried to humiliate as a person with depth, patience, and resilience. A person who had suffered but refused to break. And in that realization, the collapse was complete, not just of their plans but of their illusions of superiority. She had survived. She had grown. She had risen. They had fallen. And fate had ensured that the lesson was clear. Cruelty returns, envy destroys, and the underestimated can outlast the proud. The house was quiet that evening, the air heavy with memories and unspoken truths. She sat alone by the window, looking out at the soft glow of the setting sun. Her mind wandered across the years, childhood whispers, endless comparisons, the public humiliation at her wedding, the quiet suffering that had followed. And then, beyond it all, the slow rise of her own strength. Her sisters' faces floated into her thoughts. The pride that had once seemed untouchable now lay shattered. Their mistakes, their envy, their cruelty, everything they had done to break her had been mirrored back upon them. She could feel the urge to savor it, to relish the justice that life had delivered. It would have been easy. Easy to mock, easy to scorn, easy to turn her pain into a weapon. But she did not. She had endured too much to let bitterness define her. She realized that revenge would only continue the cycle they had begun. And she no longer wanted to be part of it. Instead, she faced a choice: forgiveness or final distance. Forgiveness would not erase the past. It would not make the humiliation disappear. It would not undo the years of pain. But it would free her from carrying anger that could poison her future. Distance would mean protecting herself from further harm, keeping her heart and mind unburdened. It would mean separating her life from theirs completely, refusing to let them hold power over her ever again. She thought of the life she had built quietly. Her husband, her home, the respect she now commanded, not through loud words but through steady, deliberate actions. She thought of the dignity she had fought to maintain even when everything tried to crush it. She realized that her choice did not have to be dramatic. It did not require confrontation or explanations. It was her power, her freedom, her life. And so she chose both. She chose forgiveness, not to absolve them, not to invite them back into her life, but to release herself from the grip of anger and bitterness. She chose distance, not out of hatred but out of self-preservation, ensuring that their past cruelty could never define her again. For the first time in her life, she felt completely untethered from the shadows of her sister's envy and cruelty. She had survived, endured, and grown stronger, and that strength could no longer be taken from her. She smiled softly, a smile not of triumph over others, but of quiet triumph over her own fears. She understood that freedom was not about revenge, it was about reclaiming her own life. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she felt a deep, steady peace. Her story would not be one of bitterness. It would be one of resilience, dignity, and the strength to rise above cruelty. She had been humiliated. She had been underestimated. She had been hurt. But she had also endured. She had risen. And she was free. The choice was hers, and she had made it. Years passed, and life continued its steady rhythm. The story of the wedding, the humiliation, the sister's envy, these became part of the past, a chapter that shaped her but did not define her. She walked through her days with quiet confidence. Her marriage thrived on respect, understanding, and love that grew deeper with every shared moment. Neighbors and family now treated her with admiration, not pity. She no longer had to prove herself. Her life was the proof. Her sisters, once proud and unyielding, lived under the weight of their own choices. Opportunities slipped through their fingers. Friendships faltered. Pride that had seemed untouchable now became isolation. People whispered, not in admiration but with judgment. And though they had tried to harm her, she watched from a distance without malice. Fate, she realized, had a way of speaking without words. It had delivered justice naturally without her lifting a finger. She did not need revenge. Life itself had corrected the balance. In moments of quiet reflection, she thought back to her childhood, the silences, the belittling, the years of being overlooked. She acknowledged the pain without letting it rule her. She recognized her strength, her endurance, and her resilience. And in that recognition she found peace. Her story became one of triumph over cruelty, of rising above envy and injustice. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The world had witnessed her journey through her choices, her dignity, and the quiet power of endurance. She understood the truth that had guided her through every hardship. Humiliation plants seeds, but only those who nurture bitterness allow it to grow. Forgiveness and strength, however, bloom quietly, transforming the wounded into unshakable pillars. And so she walked forward, no longer defined by the shadows of her sister's cruelty, but by her own resilience and wisdom. She lived fully, loved deeply, and carried peace within her heart. Fate had spoken. It had delivered justice without malice, without spectacle, and without hurry. And she had listened. Her life finally was hers. The story closed not with revenge, but with quiet, unwavering triumph.